Alright, now in this project, we're going to go ahead and kick things off by running npx create React app. And we're going to go ahead and call this our pets API, just like so. And we're not going to be using yarn, which is going to be the default. So I'm going to switch this over to use npm, just to make sure that we are in fact getting a package.lock.json or package-json instead of a yarn lock file. Let's go ahead and do its thing for just a moment. And once it's done, we'll go ahead and pick things back up. Okay, now once everything is completed, we can go ahead and cd into our pets API directory. And we want to go ahead and install two modules here. The first one is going to be the JavaScript implementation of the Amplify library, as well as the React specific components that the library provides to us as well. So AWS Amplify and AWS Amplify / UI-React. These will go ahead and just take a moment to install. And once these get done, then we can go ahead and start configuring some of our resources by first initializing our project to be used with Amplify. Okay, that went ahead and got done. I'm going to clear out my terminal here. And now we can go ahead and run the command amplify init, in which case it'll walk us through a series of prompts. I'm going to go ahead and keep this as our pets API for the project name. I'm going to say dev, though that can be whatever you want. I am using VS Code. And I have some React specifics that I'm just going to go ahead and accept the defaults for. Now when it comes to our default provider, it is using CloudFormation under the hood to scaffold a lot of this out. And then I do have an AWS profile that I'm going to work with called default. Now this is initializing our project in the cloud, meaning it's just setting up that meta information that we provided to it, along with the specific policies and IAM roles that are needed to get things done. Alright, once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and clear some space once more, and we'll go ahead and configure our first backend resource, which is going to be a Cognito pool, which we can add by running the command Amplify Add Auth. Now once I do this, we can go ahead and see we have several options that we can choose from. I'm going to go ahead and select the default configuration where we can allow our users to sign in with a username, and that's all we're going to be doing from here. It looks like I accepted all the defaults, so let me go ahead and show you what's happening here. We can go ahead and see we have various options to add users to groups and other capabilities that can be provided inside of our application. And once that's done, I can go ahead and run the command amplify push to push up our backend resource to the cloud. Alright, now once that gets configured, we can go ahead and clear our screen. And from here, let's go ahead and open up our application so that way we can get a sense of what's happening inside of our project. Now I'm going to go ahead and bring this over into full page mode, and we'll hop into our source app.js. Now this is just the default that React provides to us. However, we're not going to be using this logo, as we're going to go ahead and get rid of everything inside of the header elements here. Now what we are going to do is go ahead and provision our front end to be able to speak with our backend. And we'll go ahead and kick things off by importing Amplify from AWS Amplify. In addition, we want to go ahead and take note that one of the files that got generated for us is going to be this AWS exports file. This is definitely a secrets file that you don't want to share or push up to version control, and as such, I am going to go ahead and be deleting this project afterwards so that these will be null and void. Back over in our app.js file, I'll go ahead and bring in that secrets file by saying import, and I'll just call it my config from AWS exports, just like so. Additionally, one other item that I do want to go ahead and bring in is going to be a with Authenticator component that is going to be provided to us through AWS Amplify UI React. Now from here, I can go ahead and rely on IntelliSense to bring this in, and this will go ahead and give us a nice authentication service that we can go ahead and copy into our project here. This is great. Now go ahead and say hello here, making sure that I make the connection between Amplify and our config by calling the method amplify.configure. In doing so, we can pass in our config, save the project, and make sure that we go ahead and start things up on localhost 3000. Alright, now when the application loads, you can go ahead and see that with Authenticator component went ahead and wrapped our entire application to provide to us this nice form that we can use to log into our account if we have a user already created. In our case, we're going to go ahead and select on create account, and I'll go ahead and fill this out with some reasonable defaults here. go. Alright, so I went ahead and got that configured. Now this is going to go ahead and email me a code that I can go ahead and enter here. In which case you can see it is 290454. Once I confirm, I am being brought right back into my application. And this is great, but my users don't have a way to sign out, so let's go ahead and change that. And in addition to the with Authenticator component, we'll go ahead and bring in the Amplify sign out component as well. And we can render that right after our hello component, just like so. Now if I were to go ahead and flip back over to our application, what we have here is going to be the word hello, and then we have a nice button that we can go ahead and configure and theme if we wanted to, but by default it gives us this nice orange. Great, now inside of here we can go ahead and open up a new terminal instance, because what we want to do is go ahead and get our API set up. And we'll go ahead and kick things off by running Amplify Add Api. Now we get presented with two options here. We have GraphQL and REST. I'm going to go ahead and select REST. And this part is actually fairly important, where it'll give us a default name that we can choose from. However, this is going to be the name of the file or folder within our application. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit more reasonable, in which case I'll call it our pets API. Now the configured path that we want to go ahead and select is going to be /pets. We don't have a Lambda created, so we'll go ahead and create one. And I'll go ahead and provide another well-named resource, in which case this will be our pets function. Same thing for the function name, taking note of the various languages that we can use to construct our Lambda in. I'm selecting Node.js, and we want to go ahead and have DynamoDB configured in this as well. Now we don't have a table created, so I'll go ahead and select one. And I'll say this is going to be our pets DB. This is great for our table name. And then for the first column, we want to go ahead and say that every item inside of our table is going to have a name. This name is going to be set equal to a string, noting the various types that we can select along the way. And then for the next column, we'll say yes. And in addition to every pet having a name, every pet will also have a type of pet. This will also be a string, and we aren't going to add any more columns in here, though feel free to do so if you'd like. Now in our case, in this project, we're going to go ahead and do a scan on our entire table, but if you did want to go ahead and set up different partition keys to filter the queries on, we can go ahead and select those here. As an example, I'll select name, and then for the sort key, I'll say that this is going to be set equal to the type. I won't configure any global secondary indexes, nor will I have a Lambda trigger, though that is a nice resource that we have available to us if you want to go ahead and get that configured as well. We have no other resources that this is going to talk to. And we do want to go ahead and say no to setting up a cron job, but we are going to edit the function now. This will go ahead and take us over to the file that has our backend code. And note that it did create quite a bit of code for us here, which is awesome because we don't have to write that ourselves. However, we do want to go ahead and tweak a couple things, seeing as how this is our backend code and we want to make it specific to our application. Because we are having our users log in, we're going to set the user ID present to be true. And in addition, we want to go ahead and tweak the get method for listing a bunch of objects to not use the partition key. So instead of query, we'll go ahead and switch this over to a scan. That's actually all we have to do inside of this file. So back up in the terminal, we can go ahead and select enter. It'll ask us if we want to go ahead and restrict API access. I'm going to say yes, and only authenticated users will be able to enter this. So using the spacebar, I'm going to go ahead and use my arrow keys to tap down, spacebar to select the various CRUD operations, in which case I'm selecting all of them. No other paths are going to be created in this project, and now I can go ahead and run Amplify push to go ahead and push these resources up to the cloud in addition to our Cognito interface that we created just a moment ago. Are we sure we want to continue? Well, we have storage for our database function with Lambda and API through API Gateway. All looks good. I'm going to select yes. And this will go ahead and take a moment as we are configuring quite a bit of services all at once, but I'll go ahead and catch you when this is all done. Okay, now that we have that all completed and pushed up to the cloud, I can go ahead and clear out of here. And then we're going to go ahead and flip back over to our front end. Now here's our front end code. And I'm thinking that if we just have a form where a user could enter in a name as well as the type of animal that they're working with and submit that off to a database, then we can go ahead and list the contents to see if things are configured correctly. Now one of the items that I do want to go ahead and bring in addition to the Amplify library, is the API library itself. This will allow us to contact our backend resource. Now what I'll do is I'll say when the application first loads, go ahead and contact our backend. That way we can see if any items are in there. And the way that you do that in React is through this useEffect function here. UseEffect takes in a function itself as a single argument. And then following that, we'll go ahead and pass in an empty array just to say, hey, only fire this function on the first mount of our code. Now from here, we can go ahead and provide our logic, in which case I'll say api.get. And this takes, as the pop-up suggests, the API name that we're working with. And this is why it's very specific and important that we give our API a reasonable name. Note that we called ours pets API, so I'll go ahead and provide that here. And then following that, it is asking for the path that we are trying to target, in which case we are at pets. However, since we are connected to a DynamoDB database, we do want to go ahead and provide the partition key that we are using, in which case we are using name as our partition key. Great, that's actually all we have to do to make the call. This is promise-based, so we can go ahead and inspect the results by saying .then. We'll get our pet response back. And I'm simply going to console.log all of this to the screen to make sure that we are getting a reasonable data set in return. So there's our pet response. And if I click save and flip back over to our application and open up the DevTools, you see that we do get an empty array back. This is great, so let's go ahead and create a form to see if we can add an item, and then we'll try this one more time. Now to get this set up, the first thing I'm going to do is create 3 pieces of state here. First one is going to be the pet name. Second one will be the pet type. So we're going to get that started here. Const pet name, and then we'll have a way to update that name. So we'll say set pet name. This is going to be equal to react.useState, having an empty string by default. Now following this up, we are going to have a way to assign the type for each pet. So I'll say pet type. And then for a third piece of state, that's going to be very similar, except that we don't need the pet type. We'll just call this pet. And we might as well make this plural to specify that instead of an empty string, this is going to be conformant to an array. This is looking great. However, we don't have the elements yet to utilize any of these. So let's go ahead and say, after our hello text here, we will have a form. And this form inside of it is going to have 2 inputs, the first one and a second one. First one, we'll go ahead and have a value set equal to the pet name, just like so, and then a placeholder text of Fido. Now I can say anytime that a user types into this input, we can go ahead and run a function, in which case I'll just have a callback function here. Now this is going to take in the event from the input itself, and I can say set pet name, pass it in e.target.value to represent the user's inputted text. I'm actually going to go ahead and copy this because it's so relevant to the next line. And I'll just go ahead and tweak what I need to, where I have pet name. This is now going to be set equal to the pet type. Same thing over here in our callback function, set pet name is now set pet type. These are looking great. However, I don't have a button to submit the form. So I'll say the button is just going to be having the text add pet. And on the form, this will go ahead and get triggered anytime a user clicks on the button or hits enter on the form itself by having this onSubmit function being applied. We'll go ahead and call this handle submit because this is going to have a little bit more logic, so we want to go ahead and encapsulate this outside of the function itself. Now let's go ahead and create that right up top. Const handle submit, This is going to be passed in the event from the form. And the first thing we want to do is prevent the default behavior from happening. So I'll say e.prevent default. That way our page doesn't refresh. Now in our case, we want to go ahead and call that API method, except in our instance, we'll say post. And we'll go ahead and use a very similar formula where this is going to be the pets API. And then following, we will go ahead and have the /pets route being invoked just like so. Note that we don't have to specify the partition key when we are using the post request. However, from here, we do want to go ahead and provide an empty object. This is going to be sent as the body or the payload over to our backend. So this is going to be the body that we have inside of here. Note that if you wanted to, you can also specify headers as another property on this main object. Now for us, we will say that the name is going to be set equal to the pet name. And then the type is going to be set equal to the pet type. This is looking great. However, we want to go ahead and make sure that we can render these items. So let's go ahead and test this out, and then we can see where we can take things from there. So I will go ahead and say that for Fido, we'll switch this up and we'll call this Mr. Good Boy. And it's going to be a dog, and we can go ahead and add this pet. Now if everything went successful, then once I refresh the screen, I should be able to get one item here. It looks like we have Mr. Good Boy, the dog, as well as the user ID of the currently authenticated user. This is great. So let's go ahead and flip back over to our application. And now we know that we have an array with an object and a couple of properties on here. So because this is promise-based, I can say .then, in which case we get the response data back. Now this response data looks like it is, if we flip back over to our application, not containing any other meta information. It is simply our data itself. This is awesome because we don't have to do any additional parsing. So I can say we want to go ahead and set pets, which is currently an empty array, to be whatever is in it as far as the current pets, plus all of this response data. And we're simply using the spread operator here to spread this out. Now to make this a little bit more reasonable, we can call this our fetch pets. And I'll go ahead and use the same name here. That way it's a little bit clearer to other developers on what's happening. This is looking great. So now we can go ahead and use this to go ahead and render these out to the screen. So underneath our form, I'll go ahead and have an unordered list. And inside of here, a pair of curly braces, because I am going to be using the built-in map function by saying pets.map. And for each pet, we want to go ahead and return a list item where the content inside of it is going to be the pet's name. Note that I have a small typo here where I'm referencing pets. This is actually going to be pet. This is great, though I also want to go ahead and assign the state over to our useEffect. That way, instead of logging the data out, we can go ahead and assign this to our state as well. So inside of here, we get our pet response, which is actually all of the pets that we currently retrieved. And I'll go ahead and say we want to set pets, having this set equal to any current pets that are available, just like how we did before, in addition to this new array, which is going to be our pet response here. So essentially we'll have one array filled with an array of objects, which is exactly what we want. Now with that in place, if we flip back over to our application, it should have refreshed, and you can see that we have Mr. Goodboy showing up here. I'll go ahead and refresh again, and there we go. Now if I were to enter in another item here, we'll say that the name is going to be Remy, and he is a dog. We'll go ahead and add him, and you see that our application blows up. If we take a look at the app.js and inspect what is going on with our post, you'll notice that what happens when we post an object is that we're actually not getting back the data. rather than a success message with a URL that also contains the data itself. So we don't want that. And inside of our current app, we can actually forego this whole setting to pets by simply updating our state. What that means is that we can actually get rid of this fetch pets, and inside of here, we can go ahead and say set pets, pass it in an array, which is going to be equal to whatever pets are currently there, in addition to one more pet with the name that is set equal to the pet name, and then the type, which is set equal to the pet type as well. There we go. So now you see Remy and Mr. Goodboy here. And if I were to add one more item, I can go ahead and say Choco is going to be a hamster. Hit enter. Notice that it took place right away. No network calls had to be made. And then if I were to refresh, then we can go ahead and get all three listed here. Now we did notice that it is out of order. So I'm going to go ahead and make one small tweak where instead of having pets first, we'll go ahead and list that last. Just like so. That way, every time a pet is added, it is in the correct order as when we refresh the screen. So this has been a lesson on how to use DynamoDB, API Gateway, as well as AWS Cognito, in addition to Lambda within a React application, all within the confines of AWS Amplify. As you notice, it makes it very simple through the CLI interface to get things taken care of. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you all next time.